I first noticed her because she always sat in the same corner of the coffee shop, the seat by the window that caught the late afternoon light. It wasn't the kind of noticing that happens like a punch to the chest, more like a glance that lingered too long, then became a habit. I didn't even know her name yet. That day, the place smelled faintly of burnt espresso and rain on the sidewalk outside. I was waiting for my coffee, scrolling through my phone without really reading anything. My thumb hovered over a half-written message I knew I wouldn't send. "You free later?" sat there, addressed to no one anymore. I deleted it before the barista called my order. When I turned, she was already looking up from her book, like she'd felt me watching. A small nod, almost polite, but her eyes held just long enough to make me look away first. I sat 2 tables over. She had a thermos on the table beside her untouched cup, fingers brushing it every so often, like she wasn't sure whether to pour from it or not. Her left hand moved to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and I found myself watching the motion longer than I should have. "Long line today," I said, halfway toward her, halfway to myself. Her mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. "Always is when it rains." That was all. I took it like it meant more than it did. I always did that with her, pull meaning from the smallest scraps. The coffee was too hot, but I kept sipping just to give my hands something to do. She went back to her book, but I saw her eyes flick toward me once, quick and almost shy, though I doubted a woman like her ever felt shy. Mid-40s, maybe. There was something settled about the way she carried herself, like she knew exactly how much space she was allowed and no more. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. Just some kid killing time between classes? Or did she notice the way I couldn't stop glancing at her hands, the neat way she turned a page, the soft line of her wrist? The truth was, I was lonely. Not the kind of loneliness that sends you storming into bars or swiping your way through strangers. Mine was quieter. The kind you hide behind earbuds and homework, behind a phone you unlock just to lock again. I wasn't even sure when I'd started coming to this coffee shop regularly, maybe it was because she did. At one point, I caught myself folding my napkin into smaller and smaller squares, not even realizing I was doing it until she looked over again. Her gaze dropped to my hands, then lifted back up, and this time, she smiled. Small, but real. "You're here often," she said. "Yeah. You too." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Something flickered in her expression then, like a quick calculation she wasn't sure she should share. But instead of answering, she just closed her book, set it on the table, and slipped the strap of her bag over her shoulder. She stood, raincoat rustling, and for a second I thought she'd walk past without another word. But when she reached the door, she hesitated, turned slightly back toward me. "You should try the lemon loaf next time," she said, almost casually. "It's better than the coffee." And then she was gone, umbrella blooming open against the rain. I sat there, napkin folded into a perfect square on the table, heart caught somewhere between a question and an answer. My phone buzzed just once, screen lighting with an unknown number and a single message: "You're braver than you think." I stared at it until the letters blurred, wondering how she could possibly know. A week later, I found myself in the rain again, standing outside the duplex with a paper bag of groceries cutting into my fingers. My umbrella had flipped inside out halfway down the block, so by the time I made it home, I was drenched. She was already on the porch, fumbling with her keys. "You'll catch something walking around like that," she said, voice steady but softer than I remembered. She glanced at the bag, then at me. "Need a towel?" I followed her upstairs without thinking, shoes squeaking against the steps. Inside, her place smelled faintly of lavender and something baked, not recent, but lingering. She handed me a towel, and when my fingers brushed hers, I pulled back too quickly, like the touch burned. "Thanks," I said. She just nodded and turned toward the kitchen. I should have left then, but instead I stood in the doorway, towel pressed awkwardly to my neck, watching her pour hot water into 2 mugs. The kettle hissed as she set it down, steam curling between us. "You don't have to," I began. "It's just tea." She slid a mug toward me across the counter. Not everything has strings attached. Her words sat heavy between us. I wondered who had put strings on her before, and why she felt the need to say it now. We drank in silence, the rain thrumming against the windows. She leaned against the counter, hair still damp from outside. Up close, I noticed the small lines around her eyes, the kind that come from laughing more than frowning. She didn't seem fragile. She seemed practiced. Like she'd lived through things that had weathered her and left her both softer and harder in turns. I used to come here with my husband, she said suddenly, eyes fixed on her mug. This place. These walls. We bought it when we thought everything was permanent. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I hadn't even known she was married, or had been. A part of me wanted to ask questions, but another part was terrified of the answers. She lifted her gaze, catching me staring. And now you're up there, she said, tilting her head toward the ceiling. Making the place yours. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Mostly just clutter and textbooks. Something about her tone, half fond, half resigned, made my chest tighten. I imagined her walking past my door, hearing the muffled sound of my music, the late-night pacing. I wondered if she ever paused, ear tilted slightly, the way I had paused at her door once when I smelled bread baking. The silence stretched. I wanted to tell her something in return, so I did the first stupid, honest thing that came to mind. I almost text people sometimes, I said, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug. But I delete it before I send. Feels safer that way. Her eyes softened, though she didn't say anything. She just reached across the counter, slid the folded napkin I hadn't realized I'd been fidgeting with out from under my hands, and smoothed it flat. A small, almost meaningless gesture, except it wasn't. She left her palm resting there, close enough that if I moved even an inch, we'd be touching. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, I thought later, lying awake. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It was a Tuesday evening when I saw her again, this time not in the quiet of her kitchen but at the mailboxes outside. She was already there, pulling envelopes from the slot with her usual care, the way she did everything. I slowed down, my own key hovering in midair, just to catch her glance. You keep strange hours, she said, tilting her head slightly. Classes run late. I shrugged, though the truth was I'd lingered at the library longer than necessary, hoping to avoid walking past her door at the usual time. She handed me a flyer that had been shoved into her box by mistake. Our fingers brushed, and she didn't move away immediately this time. But her gaze, quick, flicking to the side, was enough to remind me there were limits. That night, she knocked softly on my door. A quiet thud, like she didn't want anyone to hear. She held out a small plate of cookies, slightly uneven, sugar dusting her fingers. I made too many, she said. I wanted to tell her I didn't believe that for a second, that she'd made them for me, but the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead, I stepped back, let her in. We sat at my small table, the one that barely fit 2 chairs. She laughed lightly at the stack of textbooks, shifting them aside so she could set down the plate. You study like someone running out of time, she murmured. Maybe I am, I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant by it. Her eyes lingered on me then, longer than they should have. And I realized how close we were sitting. Too close. The air in the room felt heavier, the sound of the refrigerator hummed too loud. I couldn't stop glancing at her hands, resting in her lap now, fingers curling in and out, restless. She broke the silence first. This isn't. I shouldn't, her voice caught, and she pressed her lips together. I wanted to say something, anything, to make it easier for her. But before I could, there was a knock at the front door. Loud, careless. A friend of mine from class, calling my name, laughing about something. I froze. She did too. I opened the door only a crack, enough to wave him off with an excuse about studying. When I turned back, she was standing, smoothing her coat, already gathering herself like nothing had happened. "I should go," she said, avoiding my eyes. I stood there useless, half wanting to stop her, half relieved she'd decided for both of us. At the door, she paused. The pause stretched, filling the room like a held breath. Then she turned, her face close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her mouth, the way her hair fell slightly loose. Her lips parted, just a fraction, like she might say something, or maybe like she might step into the space between us. My heart jolted forward, every nerve alive. But then she shook her head, almost imperceptibly, and slipped out into the hall. The room felt emptier than it had ever been. It was late, past the time when most of the block had gone dark. I saw her outside, sitting on the bench by the mailbox, a paper cup of coffee cooling between her palms. I almost walked past, told myself it wasn't my business, but something in the tilt of her shoulders stopped me. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, sliding onto the bench a cautious distance away. She let out a breath, half a laugh. "Something like that." We sat there listening to the quiet. The hum of a streetlight. A car passing slow on wet asphalt. "I saw you with your friend the other night," she said suddenly. Her tone was careful, almost too careful. "Yeah," I said, unsure where this was going. "Just someone from class." She nodded, staring at her cup. "You looked comfortable." There was no judgment in her voice, but I heard something under it. Not anger exactly. Something closer to hesitation. And maybe that was when something broke in me. I don't really feel comfortable with people," I admitted. The words felt clumsy in the air, too raw. "Not like that. I don't even know why I let him in. I stopped, swallowed, tried again. It's different with you." Her head lifted, eyes catching mine. Too directly. I almost looked away. "That's dangerous," she said quietly. I laughed under my breath, but it wasn't humor. "I know." Her hand tightened around the paper cup. She didn't drink from it, just held it, steam long gone. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down. "You think I don't notice," she murmured, "but I do. The way you look. The way you," her voice faltered, then steadied. "And I'm not blind to what it means." My throat felt dry. "Then why don't you?" I cut myself off, shaking my head. "Forget it." "No. Say it." Her voice was firm, almost sharp. The words came before I could stop them. "Then why don't you stop me?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. She turned her gaze back to the dark street, jaw tight, shoulders rigid. For a long time we just sat there, silence louder than anything else. Finally, she spoke, softer this time. "Because part of me doesn't want to." The world seemed to narrow in that moment, to the bench, the space between us, the sharp cold of night air. My pulse thundered in my ears, and every inch of me wanted to close the distance. She set the paper cup down on the bench, empty now. Her hand lingered against the wood slat, close enough that if I stretched just slightly, our fingers would touch. I leaned forward a fraction, heart in my throat. She didn't move away. But then her breath hitched, and she whispered, almost to herself, "What happens if we can't undo it?" I froze, inches from her, the question hanging in the air between us like a line we weren't sure we could cross. And for once, I didn't have an answer. The next few days, she was different. Not colder, exactly, just absent. Her blind stayed drawn in the morning, the usual sound of her kettle never drifted down through the thin ceiling. I passed her door on my way upstairs and heard nothing, not even the faint shuffle of a radio. At first, I thought she might be avoiding me. Then I convinced myself I was imagining it. But by the fourth day, the silence was too pointed to ignore. I started hanging around the coffee shop again, hoping to catch her there, but her corner seat stayed empty. The barista noticed me loitering longer than usual, but didn't comment. By the fifth evening, I almost knocked on her door. I stood outside with my knuckles poised, heart hammering, rehearsing something casual. "Do you need groceries? or want me to fix the mailbox latch? But I never made contact. Instead, I went back upstairs and sat in the dark, staring at my phone. There were a dozen drafts sitting unsent. You okay? Haven't seen you around. Did I do something? Each time, I deleted them. On the 6th day, I finally saw her. She was on the porch, setting down a grocery bag, her movements brisk, efficient. There was a boy with her, 16, maybe 17. He looked like her. Same dark eyes, same tilt of the chin. My son, she said when she noticed me watching. Just that. No explanation, no invitation for questions. He gave me a polite nod before disappearing inside, and she lingered only long enough to adjust her sleeve before following him. No glance back. I stood there, feeling like someone had pulled the floor away from under me. Not betrayal, there had never been promises, but something heavier. A realization that whatever this was, it wasn't just between us. After that, things changed. She still smiled when we passed, but it was the polite kind you give a neighbor. She never lingered, never paused at my door. If I caught her eye, she looked away too quickly. And I tried to mirror her distance. Stopped going to the coffee shop. Let my nights stretch longer, my textbooks blur into nothing. But the pull didn't go away. One evening, I caught myself standing by my window, watching the glow of hers. A shadow moved across the curtain, her, probably, setting down a mug. I imagined her son in the next room, imagined the boundaries she must be drawing in her head. And I couldn't decide if I respected her more for it, or if I resented her for not letting me inside that life. I drafted another message. This one longer. I don't know what I am to you. I just know I notice when you're not there. I stared at it for a long time. Thumb hovering over send. Then I locked the phone, placed it face down, and left it that way. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. It happened on a Sunday night, quiet and unplanned. I was taking out the trash when I saw her standing on the back steps, a sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. She wasn't smoking, though she looked like someone who should have been, just to have something for her hands to do. I hesitated, bag in hand. She looked over, caught me frozen there. For a moment, neither of us moved. You've been scarce, she said finally, voice low. Thought that's what you wanted, I answered. Too quick, too defensive. Her face shifted, something between tired and sad. She gestured toward the step beside her. I dropped the trash bag, wiped my palms on my jeans, and sat. The wood was cold beneath me. For a long time, we just listened to the distant hum of traffic. I could hear my own pulse louder than anything. I wasn't hiding from you, she said eventually. I just needed space. My son was here. I nodded. Makes sense. She studied me then, like she was measuring whether I could handle the truth. You're too young, she said softly. You should be falling in and out of love with people who don't carry whole histories on their backs. The words should have stung. Instead, I felt myself leaning forward, elbows on my knees, trying to catch her gaze. Maybe I don't want that kind of love. Her laugh was quiet, almost broken. Careful what you say. People might believe you. I swallowed hard. My hands were restless, clasping, unclasping. I thought of every message I'd typed and deleted, every moment I'd stopped just short of telling her the truth. So I said it, not all at once, but enough. I don't just notice you because you're here. I notice you because, my voice caught, but I forced it out. Because I want to. She turned to me, and I saw the walls she always kept, measured smiles, polite nods, fall just a little. Do you know what it costs me to hear that? She whispered. I didn't, not really. But I could imagine. And still, I nodded. Her hand was on her lap, still, fingers curling inwards. Without thinking, I placed mine beside it, not touching, just close. She didn't move away. The silence stretched, heavy but not unbearable. "I can't promise you anything," she said at last. "Not the kind you probably want. I'm not asking for promises." My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. Just honesty. Her eyes met mine, and for once she didn't look away. The night around us felt stripped down to this, just her, just me, the unspoken weight finally spoken aloud. And then she did the smallest, most dangerous thing. She let her hand shift, just enough for her fingers to brush mine. Not a grip. Not a claim. Just contact. "Okay," she murmured. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't closure. But it was real. And that was enough to undo me. Time passed quietly after that night on the steps. Nothing dramatic, no declarations, no midnight ultimatums. Just small adjustments, like two people learning how to breathe in the same room. I started noticing her door was open more often in the evenings, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Sometimes I'd hear her kettle whistling at 8:47 sharp, and she'd leave the second mug waiting on the counter without a word. Other times, I'd catch her sitting on the bench outside, coffee cooling in her hand. She never said she was waiting, but she always looked up when I came by. We never talked about rules, or what it was, or what it wasn't. But there was a rhythm. On Sundays, she'd bake something, sometimes uneven cookies, sometimes bread that filled the whole house with warmth. I'd offer to do the dishes, and she'd let me, even though I always left water spots on the glasses. One night in late spring, I found her on the porch after a long day. She looked tired but not worn down, just the kind of tired that comes from carrying more than one life at a time. I sat beside her, our shoulders brushing, and handed her my black coffee. She wrinkled her nose but took a sip anyway. "Still terrible," she said. "Still better than the lemon loaf," I answered, and that made her laugh. It was never about the words. It was about the pauses, the comfortable kind this time, not the aching silences we used to sit in. I'd glance at her hands, still restless sometimes, and without thinking she'd let them find mine. No urgency, no need to fill in the space with anything more. Her son came by less often in the summer. When he did, I stayed upstairs, gave them their time. But once, when I was leaving for class, he passed me on the porch and nodded again, polite, but warmer than before. He must have noticed how the house felt different now. Looking back, I don't think there was a single moment when everything changed. "No, I'm yours," whispered at midnight, no forever claimed in a single breath. It was quieter than that. It was her pouring tea for both of us without asking. It was me showing up at the bench even when I had nothing to say. I never felt like I'd won her, or like she'd given in. It was something else, like we'd both stopped resisting what was already happening, and let it become ordinary. Ordinary in the best way. Now, every time I catch the kettle whistling at 8:47, I think about the first time I almost spoke and didn't. About the folded napkin, the almost kiss, the question she never answered. And how somehow, despite everything, we made it here anyway. I don't know if you'd call that love. But it feels like it. And maybe that's enough.